Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the current furor over H1B visas. I noted, and I'll do a separate video on this, I noted Laura Ingram's interview with President Trump and President Trump's seeming determination to stay with H1B visas in the United States. Those are the skilled or supposedly skilled worker visas, on the basis that America doesn't have the talent, doesn't have the capability or the skills, and so they have to go to third world shithole basket case near failed state countries like India and Afghanistan or wherever to go, and Pakistan to go and get these supposedly huge talents. Now that on the face of it is obviously absurd, but President Trump or his advisors have told him this, and he seems to be running with it. But what was notable was the look of disappointment on Laura Ingram's face. Now, Laura Ingram is obviously she's an experienced journalist and so on, an interviewer, but she's very pro-Trump as far as I can tell, and you could see the look of disappointment sort of flicker over her face when President Trump started coming out with this H1B nonsense. America doesn't have the skills, and it is nonsense, by the way. It's again, what the most notable thing of the interview was just that look of disappointment on Laura Ingram's face, and President Trump, I got the impression I got at least was even a little irritated with the, you don't know what you're talking about, I do, and this sort of thing, and I didn't like that. That's not what. President Trump is the people's president. He is there to respond to the wishes of the people who put him into office. And in spite of however many millions of cooked up votes they got for Kamala, Trump still got across the line. And it's because of those people that voted for him. They voted for him to fix these problems. And H1B visas is a huge, I would argue, a huge problem. And so that's what I wanted to address in this essay, was to. Now, what's to be done to H1Bs? There's a lot of claims. Oh, what can we do? We can all the people that come in are quadruple PhD rocket scientists with a 10 million IQ. That's bullshit. So, who are the people coming in with H1Bs? Well, even on a basic look at the stats shows that so between 80 and 90% of the people coming in are really just for lower entry level jobs. And this sort of assuming that that's the talent and skills is the issue. I don't believe it is, but just running with President Trump's assertion there that lack of talent and skills in America is the issue, then why would you go to a shithole like fucking India to get these supposed people for entry level jobs? There are plenty of young kids coming out of college, STEM kids coming out of college in the United States, or you could go elsewhere around the world. There's plenty of computer programmers and coders in Britain white people who would happily come to the United States. So it's not a skills issue if 80 to 90% of the people are taking entry-level jobs. That's bullshit. That's nothing to do with skills. Now, the 10% that are supposedly skilled, I would dispute how skilled they are. And I've seen H1B in Australia. I've seen H1B equivalents. When I was going to the United States on a regular basis, I was talking to people who from India and so on who'd come in on H1B visas or the equivalent of the time. And if they were gifted and bright and had skills that the Americans didn't have, then I didn't notice it. It wasn't obvious to me. Now, as I've said in many other videos, I've hired Indians who were coming to Australia in more the Brahmins in the early days, and they started to arrive really in the late 80s. They began to turn up in appreciable numbers, and of course it really kicked on 10 years from there into the late 90s. But they were coming in and they supposedly had all these qualifications, PhD in coding, computer science or something. And they were from the upper class. They were quite sophisticated in their manners and social habits, and they were all very much into this Socratic philosophy type stuff. So they were interesting to talk to, or for someone like me, they were. So, and I was being leaned on to hire hired them on the basis that you could get all these genius people for such a low price. I didn't believe that it was the case. My experience with Indians up to that time had suggested quite the opposite. It's just a lot of entitlement and upper class, almost aristocratic, Brahmin social prestige type behaviours, but not a work ethic or anything like that at all. Far from it. And this proved to be the case. Now, whenever we put Indians to the test, and first off, we gave them the benefit of the doubt, saying, well, if you say you've got a PhD from the University of Ouagadougou, we'll accept that at face value. But in every case, like in every single one, we found that they either didn't have the degree at all, or if they did have it, that because they came from a wealthy, influential family, they simply bribed the university to issue the PhD, even though it hadn't been earned. They hadn't done a day of study, they didn't hit the books and that sort of stuff. So anyway, they whenever we sort of caught up with them and said, okay, you've got to cut a line of code in front of me right now, they couldn't do it, and they engaged in all sorts of bluster and how outrageous it was that well, I'm a Brahmin, you can't question me, and that type of thing. So from that point onwards, after we'd had a run of disappointments, we began claiming fake credentials. And the Indians don't see they've done anything wrong. They don't say, well, I falsified documents, or they just don't see they've done anything wrong. They don't have a conscience structure to where they say, well, gee, I told you I had a degree, but I didn't. Or I told you I had a qualification and didn't have that, or now wouldn't they'd have got by? Say the guy said he had a PhD, the Indian guy said he had a PhD in coding, but he didn't, but he could still do the coding. Then that would be something that was, you treat that as more an embellishment than an outright falsehood or a misrepresentation. But the guy couldn't switch the fucking computer on, let alone cut a line of code, and yet he was swanning around saying he had a PhD. And out of just incredulity, I'd question, like, did you think you get away with it? Oh yeah, why not? I could bullshit my way out of that. No problem. Was their attitude, and anyway, I'm a Brahmin. Most people don't have any right to question me or check on my credentials. That would be considered the height of rudeness and so on in India, and so it's a lower class guy like you, referring to me, the Brahmin. They've got no right to question me, but this is Australia. It's a bit of a strange place, and you expect me to do work. The reality is, in India, if I go and work for a company, the prestige of me being a Brahmin and my family, that's what they're hiring. They're hiring someone who's actually going to do work. And so this testing them and saying, okay, well, you claim to have this expertise. Test the computer, cut a line of code, and show us you can do it. And hardly any of them could. In fact, I don't remember one that could. There's a couple of them may make a clumsy, half-assed sort of beginner's attempt at it, but no one could do it. So that's where we came to the realization that no Indian claiming to have certain qualifications or skills or capability, none of them could be trusted to actually have that qualification. Even if they'd got a qualification from a Western university, the chances are very high they had an affirmative action degree, which meant they effectively were given a dispensation from having to really show that they knew it or could do it. Nonetheless, the ones who had a Western degree did better than the ones from India, of course. But the reality is that none of them could do it. Now, I suppose in the overall numbers, if we'd gone on for long enough, we surely would have found someone that could do, had the qualifications they claim to have. There's just very few of them. Now, the same thing is going on with the H1B visas in the United States or all over the world. The Indians aren't uniquely different coming to Australia than they are going to America. In all my dealings with Indians anywhere in the world at any time on anything, it's always been the same playbook. So this again, the same must be in America. So how do you solve the H1B? Well, it involves, it's fairly simple, really. You have a very impartial, independent, high bar. And you say, okay, you want to bring skills in? What skills are you talking about? Entry-level programming? No, that's not fucking skills. Well, we want a rocket scientist who's going to design the next rocket that goes to Mars or something. Okay, fine. Then we're going to examine rigorously, have a rigorous test, independently and partially examined. And any Indian wanting to come to, or anybody, it doesn't have to be Indian, anybody wanting to have an H1B visa has to pass that test. And if you can pass that test, then we'll welcome you in. You are a highly skilled person, and we would struggle to find such skills in the United States, so or anywhere else. Now, the idea that these highly skilled people only exist in third world shitholes in itself is an absurdity. Nonetheless, have a high bar test, and anyone who passes that high bar test or examination is then given the H1B visa. It's not hard. It's not difficult. You just put a rigorous, independent, impartial high bar in place, and whoever meets that high bar gets the H1B visa. That's all that's required. So this would mean that, pretty much all, other than a handful, there's a population of 1.5 billion or something there in India, and there's got to be some really bright people among that. Got to be, just on a balance of probability alone. So, but just not very many. Now, no matter which sort of mass immigration thing you look at, less than 5% of people coming in are even economically viable, and that's just how it is. Most of the people are not even economically viable. Of those that are economically viable, there'll be a handful of bright people there, but there's never many. I mean, how many kids at school or uni or wherever you knew that were particularly bright? Any? I mean, just a small. It was always a small handful wherever you went. In the year of the form, I remember my last say year 10, before there's a big clear out in the junior high school diploma. There was, I don't know, 100 or so kids in that year, and there'd be 3 or 4 that were bright, and they're not even that exceptionally bright, 1 or 2. As a kid who was a bit of a mathematics whiz, but he wasn't so good in any of the other subjects. But there just weren't that many bright kids. Even the top class of the top class of the brightest kids was always the smallest class in the year. There just weren't many, and those were in the days when they still had a sort of a high bar you had to meet, but they weren't out of 100 kids, there'd be 15 in the top class. And the classes different. There'd be the kids who were good at mathematics, or the kids who were good at science, or there'd be different English and all the geography and so on, history or whatever. So there weren't many kids who were in the top stream, and the same goes in any field of endeavour. And the more rigorous the endeavour, rocket science, for example, then the fewer people who are going to meet that standard. And that should be the standard for H1B. We want skilled people, skilled people, and prove you're skilled, meet this independent, impartial high bar, then you can have your H1B visa. I don't see what the problem is. Apply that high bar standard, all problems will then be solved. You've been a TASIS today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.